10 seconds, we're going to go. And I'll just do a little bit of an intro.
Great.
Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, this is IDAGIO Live. It's Thursday, so it must be Thursdays with Thomas, visiting with wonderful colleagues and personalities from around the music world, some that I know very well and some that I only know a little well and some that I don't know at all. And so there's a mixture of that tonight with my two wonderful guests, Lauren Meeker, a distinguished stage director and choreographer whom I've never worked with, but I have admired her work and she doesn't know that. We'll get to that in a minute. And of course, my very esteemed colleague, Ryan McKinney, who has taken very much too much work from my plate, but that's okay. Last time I saw you, Ryan, you were Don Giovanniing and I was Da Ponteing. So somehow we were related at the same time. Yeah. And you didn't have a beard at that time. Tell us about the beard. Is this a COVID protest?
It is, I mean, I say to people, I'm sort of a beard person, but like in real life, in the before times, as you know, makeup designers are the ones that tell you what to do with your face, but no one's telling me what to do with my face now. So we'll see how long it lasts. But the last time I had a beard,
every time
Dutchman, which was quite a while.
But that's a significant beard. I mean, that takes a while to grow it that long, isn't it? I mean,
it goes pretty quick. This is probably, a couple months worth or something.
The problem is, I mean, when you have that lovely tuft of gray, that's really cool with the dark and everything. When you have mine, the tuft is, it's all gray and there's little spots of black. And never mind. We're not going to talk about beards tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, why we have these guests, these two people have embarked on an extraordinary project together, several projects together, which we are going to get to. Ryan McKinney is one of the most sought after bass baritones in our business today. I'm sure you've come across his name, and we're going to look a little at his discovery, but I want to hear that from him. Loren, I see Loren. Do you just go by Loren or should I call you Loren?
You can call me Lauren.
Or Loren.
Yeah. No. Or it depends on the situation, maybe.
Exactly. Right. Look, what I thought maybe be the easiest is just maybe if each one of you could give a sort of that Wikipedia blush of where you're from. You're both American, right?
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Obviously. I mean, I knew that you were Ryan. I wasn't quite sure. But, what literally the early days, where you grew up, was it a musical household, where you went to school? How, give us the 2.5 minute Wikipedia. Who wants to go first? Ryan, give it to us.
I'll dive in. I grew up in the Los Angeles area in California, kind of splitting my time in North Carolina. My parents were classical guitarists when they were in college. So I sort of grew up with classical music around. They both really didn't like opera. So I sort of rebelled by falling into the opera world. But I sort of was into musical theater and things like that when I was like a little kid and a teenager. And then I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. And I went to a city college in California, Pasadena City College, which actually has a really terrific music school. And I started studying voice just because it was one of the things you could do. And had a teacher who said, you might, take some more interest in this. You should listen to these opera recordings. And I promptly went to the library and took out all of these different things and fell in love with it. I listened to, I think one of my first recordings was like a compilation of Leonard Warren arias that was like just mind-blowing to me that human voices could sort of express emotion and sound. Of course, then that set my standard a little too high, I think. But anyway, then I got pretty serious about it over a few years, and I transferred to the Juilliard School in New York. I spent several years there. Then I spent a few years at the Houston Grand Opera Studio, which is kind of my home company. And I've been back there a lot and been ever since. And then the last 6 months, I've picked up this habit of making these film things, which has been pretty interesting and fun, which I'm sure we can get into later. But so that's my story in a nutshell.
It's a wonderful Wikipedia blush. Lauren.
So I grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts. That's still where my family is based. And I have a lot of immediate family and extended family in theater. And surprisingly
Right.
enough, all behind the scenes theater. So set designers, lighting designers, managing directors, stage managers. So I grew up in a very theatrical family. And up until my junior year of high school, I was always in the arts, but never considered really going into them. And then somebody said, okay, you have to apply to
Right.
colleges. And I thought, wow, I really want to be a marine biologist. But it turns out you have to be good at math and swimming, and I am terrible at both of those things. So I abandoned my dream to save the manatee and went to theater school instead. So I went to Boston University and received a degree in directing and choreography. And all through college, it was really straight theater and musical theater. I do not have family or did not have exposure, at least, to opera until after I had graduated from college. And it just was by accident that a colleague of mine called and said, hey, are you working right now? We have a job. We need an assistant stage manager at a company that was called Boston Academy of Music. We need an assistant stage manager. Would you be interested? And I think my response, Thomas, literally was, will you pay me? She said, yes. And I said, sounds great. And it actually ended up really quite surprisingly being right place, right time. They were doing a production of Kurt Weill's Lady in the Dark. So I wasn't dealing with the language yet. It was, I had studied Weill and been in other Weill shows in college. It was an atmosphere that I understood. And I walked into rehearsal and I thought, they need choreography and I choreograph. They need stage combat and I just got certified. They're dealing with dialogue and I just trained in that. You know, I grew up dancing and playing the saxophone so I could read the music. What is it about this art form? How did I not know about this art form? And I really, it was like a 180-degree turn in my career. I thought I was going to end up, you know, going to New York and hitting up my family colleagues and hoofing it. And instead it became almost all opera all the time. And then you fast forward, 20 some odd years, and here I am, directing and running Opera San Antonio, and it's really been a dream come true.
And that's where you are right now, right? In San Antonio?
Yes. So Ryan and I were a couple of weeks ago in Houston doing a Vinkensport together, and I did that back to back with another project, a film production of The Impresario. And since then, I've returned to San Antonio, which I now call home.
And where are you at right now, Ryan?
I am actually in the house of one Jay Hunter Morris, who you may both know. He is not here right now. He is on this tour, but tour. He and his, it's a long story. I'm going to tangent because it's a podcast style thing. You can talk about whatever you want, right? So he and his wife are doing this thing called the Kindness Tour, where they're driving all over the country serving people soup, which I think is amazing. But while he's gone, I'm borrowing his house. You can see his Grammy back here. You can't quite because I love it. A little too shallow. But anyway, I'm in Atlanta because I'm working on a film project with the Atlanta Opera. They're doing these incredible performances of Pagliacci and Der Kaiser von Atlantis in a circus tent with socially distanced audience, all basically outdoors, and it's been pretty incredible. So,
is it a double bill?
No, they're doing them separately. I think the idea is that then the audience doesn't have to have an intermission, so less issues with social distancing and things like that.
But is the Kaiser von Atlantis essentially a one or two act opera? I mean, could it be on a double bill? I thought it was a major evening.
Usually it's on a double. Well, I've done it before as a standalone thing, but it's about an hour long. So it often is put on a double bill.
It's like Wozzeck.
Yeah, I mean, it has that sort of feeling for sure.
Well, no, Wozzeck's about an hour and a half, I think.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I mean, I think it's about an hour. It's a great piece. I don't know if you know it, but it's really
the Kaiser von Atlantis.
Yeah, it's
an amazing piece. Ullmann.
Yeah, Ullmann. Actually, I have a long history with that piece. When I was at Juilliard, I James Conlon came and did he was starting his Recovered Voices project around that time, and was conducting performances with a lot of singers from Juilliard. And I was just an undergrad, but I asked if I could audition for him, and then I got to cover Die Tod and ended up doing it a lot with him. And so it's fun to be back with it again here in this other format.
Wow. Now let's go back a little bit. Where did your paths cross? How did you find each other? When did that happen?
I think our paths crossed when Ryan was in the HGO studio, and that was actually one of the first major directing staff positions that I had taken. So we're like, what, in the early to mid 2000s or something like that, Ryan? Yeah. And so we intersected really early on, and then didn't intersect for a long time. But my favorite thing about my relationship with Ryan is I was directing Don Giovanni at Washington National Opera, which was the last production, both he and I, Ryan was Giovanni. It's the last production we both did before COVID. And then Ryan started to develop these film pieces. And then the next production that I was back in rehearsal with also included Ryan. So he's bookended my COVID experience, shall we say. And it's really because I think of intersecting on the Giovanni and growing our relationship there that Vinkensport was able to happen.
When
you were
friends. Oh, go ahead. We were sort of friends, or from early on when we started working together many years ago, but then really kind of connected more artistically over Giovanni. We actually had several conversations before the production happened, and it was a really...
Yeah, we did this novel thing, Thomas, called talking to each other before we were in rehearsal and plotting and planning. It was very exciting.
Before rehearsal started?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really, as you know...
Why would you do that?
Exactly. It was novel.
But as you know, doing the piece Don Giovanni is really tricky in a lot of ways, especially these days when people, I think very rightly so, are much more sensitive to issues around sexual assault and around sexism and things like that. And so I really wanted to make sure, because I hadn't done very many Giovannis, and I knew this was going to be a new production. I just wanted to make sure that I understood what Lauren's vision was for it and that I could sort of think on that before we started. So which was great, because then by the time we got to rehearsals, we were already kind of on the same page and sort of had a vocabulary between the two of us, which now has extended through these other things too, which has been great.
It's funny that you're in your generation still fighting that battle, because I never understood it as long as I did Giovanni, and I did it, my first Giovanni was in 87, the celebration of 200 years of Don Giovanni in Salzburg. And it was, very exciting, all that. But, an opera that starts with a rape and a murder is not exactly drama giocoso. That might be a delineation, but I mean, let's get serious about what's going on here. I've always found Giovanni to be if not a sociopath, certainly a psychopath. And, people think it's such a fun, gallant sort of thing, but I can imagine you felt the same thing. We talked briefly in Houston about this. After an evening of Giovanni, you kind of want to go home and take a shower, drink a beer, and kind of go, pet the dog, look at your kids, talk to your wife, yes, you're still here. It's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, do you find it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that that's more, at least, if I think you having that feeling and me having that feeling is a good thing, because it's a kind of piece that if you're going to do it, the story justice, you really have to sort of address that. And I think there are versions, and I've seen versions where it's sort of taken very lightly, and there's this kind of wink about the whole thing that, everyone really just loves him and he's the good guy and blah, blah, blah. But I don't find that as compelling. Yeah. Not so much that I don't think there's one way to do it. I think, like all art, there's a million ways to do it. But the more compelling version to me is this person who really is like both terrible in these specific ways and human. Because that to me is like the Mozart thing that is amazing, is like three-dimensional characters, and that's something that sort of traveled with me through a lot of my career, is these terrible people who we can still get inside of and see as human beings. Because I think that's really interesting what music can do, and a lot of, just sort of talking about people can't do, where you can sort of connect. as
Well,
human beings.
exactly. I mean, what are the production that came to Houston that I saw you in a couple of years when we were there? What was that coming from? Was that
Yeah,
your production, Lauren?
No.
that one was Kaiser Holton from the Royal Opera House, which I think is also
Ah,
uh,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
yeah.
All right. And he had Giovanni very isolated. I mean, it was interesting what you say about bad characters. I mean, we low voices, we get a lot of that, but it goes back to, Lauren, what do you feel about this? When I get asked this question, I come back with in some part of my answer, I'm probably going to say, I think that opera is far more about dilemma than plot. Does that make sense to
It
you?
does. I think it depends on the piece for sure. And there are definitely I've directed operas where, as a director, I feel like I need to do a lot of stringing through between the plot that's been given to me to make the characters and the story really spring to life. Giovanni is one of those pieces where I actually think it's pretty much a gift to be able to take the material and interpret it. And one of the pieces that I think is open to so much interpretation because it depends on who you believe, who you don't believe, who's speaking the truth, who's not speaking the truth. And when I talked to Ryan very early on in the process, I said, to me, it feels like a choose your own adventure book, if people are familiar with those, where, you have to make decisions right at the top of the show. Is it a rape or isn't it? Is it consensual or isn't it? And depending on how you answer those questions, your production already starts to veer off in any number of directions. And so you get the opportunity as artists to work with pieces that have that kind of material to really chew on. I think that's pretty extraordinary.
I also think, I'll add that one thing I love about, I think often when people are talking about Giovanni, sort of traditionalists will get upset that you talk about it as I know it's almost cliche at this point to talk about Me Too, but it's a real thing. And I had the interesting experience of having those two Giovannis back to back, and the other one, even though it was Casper Holton's production, the great director Amy Lane was the person who was on the ground working with us. And so to have two women direct me in that show, have very different takes on what on how to approach it, that in particular something like the Casper Holton production, they do treat the opening scene as consensual, and in Amy's way of thinking of it, that sort of empowers these women as sort of sexual beings, right? And that their partners who aren't Giovanni are the ones that are sort of oppressive to them. And I think that's a really interesting take. And then we went the whole opposite direction in Lauren's production. And both of those takes are really valid and interesting to me. I think the uninteresting thing is just to not deal with it. If you're just like, oh, whatever, it's just what it is, and we're just going to make it look nice and move on.
Yeah, I don't even know how to do that. So I agree with you. It's not only uninteresting,
Right.
it's not only uninteresting. It's irreligious.
Yeah.
It's if you want to sing like that, go do something else. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Lauren, what was your first Mozart opera?
That's a great question. I think it was Figaro. Figaro came first, and that actually also would have been at Houston Grand Opera. I was assistant directing and choreographing. And the following season with Giovanni. So those two pieces in particular, I've had the longest history with.
Have you ever done Così?
I
Or you just said
have.
that.
I have done Così. Of the three De Pontes, it's probably the one that now, as an artist, I struggle with the most in terms of how to produce. And I'm going to leave that as like a delicious
the hell
nut
were they
that I haven't
thinking?
totally cracked. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to read De Ponte's own writings about Così and thoughts of it. I think that he and Mozart were really trying to say something along the Me Too line. But I find Così more problematic for these contemporary issues, or somehow balancing. Well, that's not entirely true. La Notte di Figaro, the droit de seigneur is just an incomprehensible bullshit. It's just a part of humanity's insanity. I mean, it's like watching Braveheart with Mel Gibson. it's incomprehensible what we as human beings have had in various cultures as machinations of possession. It's the same way I feel about slavery and racism in our country, but we're not going to get into that tonight so much. But it's just these things that are just an anathema to you, that are just, how is that possible? Droit de seigneur is just, how is that possible?
I find,
and that's to me a big problem. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say that it is a big problem. I find that to be even more of a reason to try to grapple with something like Nozze in a way that points us in something in our own society, because it can be this sort of archaic idea of something that used to happen. But of course, we have versions of that now, right? There's like these power dynamics where people think that they have, the ability to take what they want physically from somebody else. And actually, it's so cliche, and probably I shouldn't even mention this word right now, but the one that Peter Sellers directed in Trump Tower, I thought was just like, that's the story, right? Like it works. And yeah, and I think I actually love Mozart operas updated. I think there's always struggle with it. Like it doesn't quite fit. But I kind of enjoy watching directors have to struggle with it, and singers too. I think there's so
no. I get that. I absolutely get that. I have absolutely, principally, if it follows the dilemma line of the two original perpetrators, librettist and Mozart, or librettist and composer, then the updating I think makes a lot of sense. I worked a lot with Jonathan Miller, and I loved what he did, breaking things out. But I was going to say about Le Nozze is that where I've always felt edge, I was uncomfortable, and I was still singing the Count a lot, was this idea, this modern idea, and it became sort of people that just came to the opera, well, what's this all about? And the story kind of got boiled down to an employer wants to sleep with employee's wife, and he's going around his wife's back, and he wants to have an affair, but she doesn't. And I don't actually think that's what that is all about. I think that there's something that you have to understand in the society of the time. I can't get past the fact that Beaumarchais spent 11 years of his life in jail for seditious writing. So to me, there's just something always lurking back there that is making an ironic comment on our society. Does that make sense, Lauren, to you?
It does make sense. And actually, it reminds me of a lot of conversations that we're having right now, which are, I think, going to determine where our art form moves forward, which it's been easy to boil it down, and not even just Figaro, but many, many pieces tend to shy. Rigoletto is another politically charged one. Butterfly for other reasons entirely. And it's really easy. Even Aida is not really a nice story. I mean, you're dealing with warring countries and rape and murder. And, it's been very easy to allow it to just be about the music and sort of to paint with broad strokes on the real underbelly of the political or societal or human issues in these pieces. And I think personally we'll be better served as artists in this art form if we're allowed to really tackle those issues and not shy away from them, and figure out how to tackle them. Doesn't mean we have to give honor to them. It can mean, to hold as a mirror of nature and say, this is flawed, we shouldn't be doing this anymore. But to at least acknowledge it while wrapped up in some wonderful music, I think is much more extraordinary than shying away from those themes.
Well, I think that's where a lot of our public gets quite nervous, because most people want to go to the Mozart opera because it's this gorgeous music, and everybody wants to sit there and say, oh, well, okay, we know it's bullshit, but it goes by and it's, wasn't she beautiful? I love the costumes, all that kind of stuff. And yet we're trying to communicate this underbelly of human stuff inside of this beautiful brocade costume and these beautiful D major fluorescent, lines. Are you aware of that, Ryan? That sometimes we're just singing to people and they're taking it completely in the wrong way that you want it to be?
I think that's fine. To me, the artists, both composers and librettists and directors and singers, the people that are the most amazing to me are the ones that can develop their art on multiple levels, so that people that are just there to hear pretty music, they get that, or that they want a sort of easy story to follow, they get that. But then the people that are willing to look a little closer and be a little more open can get something else too. And I think That's always, especially with something like Mozart, is really interesting to me because there is a surface level of just beauty to it, right? That's wonderful. And but I am always interested in every piece that I do in finding what the truth, like the human truth of it is. And that to me is sort of the difference between, are we trying to make art, or are we just making something that's, which there's nothing wrong with entertainment as a thing. And there's certainly crossover between entertainment and art. But I think if your only goal is just to make the people happy, that's wonderful, but that's sort of not as much of interest to me. I really enjoy challenging audiences and having people sometimes be upset that like I went too far with something, or sometimes not totally get it and have to think about it for a while. Like that to me is a little more interesting than just like, let's make them happy with pretty music and nice costumes.
Or be part of a project, someone, quite frankly, today in today's director's world, it can be the director's take on a piece that can be so unbelievably provocative to the public. And either somebody's coming and say, wow, I've never seen anything that made it so clear. I never understood the piece until now. And then the other people saying, oh, I've never seen such garbage in my life. My God, they just ruined the piece. How could you possibly be part of this? I don't even know where to. There's not a question there. It's sort of like, it's just,
Yeah, and I think we live in such a strange world in the opera world because like there's very few other art forms where everyone knows the pieces so well, and we keep redoing them and redoing them and redoing them. So like, we even talk about it as singers, like, well, I think Giovanni is this, like, I don't ever see Giovanni as that. And of course, audiences feel that too, at least to some extent. And so it's always a challenge to sort of break up people's assumptions about a piece, which honestly why, and I know you do a lot of this too, I enjoy doing newer pieces some of the time because really just for the fact that the audience is fresh to it and they're not coming with these expectations. Because there's always a part of doing a Bohème or a Traviata where you're trying to help wipe the slate clean before you actually get to perform anything, because there's so much expectation about what it should sound like, what it should look like, what the story is, and it's a challenge.
Okay, let's look at COVID. Let's look at this COVID time, which is a horrible time. I don't want to. It's a terrible health time. It's a dangerous time, especially last spring. It was incredibly dangerous. It precipitated some of the most financially worrying times we've had as a society, and I'm not just America, but just period across the world. Certainly, the Western countries are still grappling with it, mainly because of their own different attitudes towards how to handle it. But so we've got a pandemic, we've got an economic crisis, we've got a complete, and I would say the third rail of this is people asking the question, okay, keeping my life together and getting my life back together are value judgments. What is something I cannot live without? What is something I have to have for family or whatever else? And you start making a list in your mind, and we're all sort of jittered like this. It's been very interesting to sit from where I sit between these two continents and seeing the very different reactions in America versus Europe. And I would imagine that list of gotta haves is pretty long and a lot of conversation before anything called the performing arts or the arts or liberal arts or liberal arts education will even come up on that list. And this is what frightens me the most about the COVID period, is that we'll get used to having less going on across the nation. I'm not talking about just New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and all that. I mean, the regional orchestras. I read the other day we have 1,600 orchestras that have been stopped in their tracks, are not functioning since last March. Now, you guys were, especially Ryan, you were amazingly at the moment. I promise you, I'm coming to some place on this. That seeing this COVID hit and seeing the immediate damage it did to, especially our younger colleagues, but just freelance colleagues in general. That's where part of this initiative came up to, and we're going to land on that. But I want to go back to this nervousness that I've talked about, that I just said about the cultural awareness. And I love what you said, Ryan, and I think it's very important we embrace this. The arts are not entertainment, but the arts are very entertaining. And there's a really healthy admission of that. There's no reason to not, it's like going to a Harold Pinter play and going to an Agatha Christie movie or a play. I mean, some things you get to chew on, and some things there's a different reaction to it. I don't know why people make such a laborious labor out of this whole opera thing, and to make fun of opera plots is just such low-hanging fruit. It's like, get past it. That's why I came up with, I don't think it's about plot. It's not theater. It's a theater environment while a musical art form takes place. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. Now, the point, and here's my point. The COVID has had, in melting us all down, has a couple silver linings. One of them is this whole ubiquitous, accepted, how do I do that, digital world, Yeah. And if you bought $10,000 worth of Zoom this time last year, you're laughing all the way to the bank.
Yep.
But the other thing is it all of us, just what you said, right? Everybody knows the plots. I've been there. How many times are you going to sing Bohème? How many times are you going to, as a public, how many times are you going to go to Bohème? And so we're all thinking of new pieces and so forth and so on. Don't you think there's a possibility that COVID, that's kind of frozen everything in its tracks, will offer us, one, new looks at old pieces, but more importantly, that the repertoire will just be a self-understood opening up? Well, something it's no longer new in the sense that in unique, it's new in that it's an addition to what we already know. You guys can riff on any of that stuff. I think of it as a plate of spaghetti on the wall. Let's see what sticks. Anything you want to react to, Lauren? I see you shaking your head. What do you want to react to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the new normal. Let me put it that way. It's going to take us a long time before we can get back to Carmen with 200 people, whether that's a modern take on it or a traditional take on it. I physically cannot produce that right now with the health and safety standards. And I think it will take a while, pending vaccines or other measures, to really get back to the place where we can physically put that many people in terms of cast and production along with audience back into a theater. So when that puzzle piece falls the way it has, then I think the industry is, if we're wise, is going, okay, so what can we do? How can we use this as an opportunity to innovate? Whether it's looking at pieces that exist that maybe are buried a little farther in the trenches, but are smaller works that could be given new life, or doing what you're suggesting, which is highlighting and creating a whole new world for new works. I for one, if there is a silver lining, which I find difficult to talk about, but it's true, if the silver lining is that innovation and pushing forward in the creation of new works is what happens, I think that's a wonderful outcome from COVID. And then those of us in positions to move the industry forward, our leaders really need to be able to not only work back towards large productions, but embrace the new normal and bring that into the future as well.
I love that, Lauren. And
Ryan.
I think that, I don't know, silver linings is an awkward phrase around COVID, but I think it's
forgive me.
No, this comes up in all of these conversations. I think it's totally it makes sense why we say that. I think that opera, we've been dealing with some of the things that we're talking about now for years in the opera world, right? That there's this sort of falling off of support in some age groups, and there's a kind of stasis and a sort of feeling of being stuck, especially in some of the larger companies. And so I think that what's happening right now is that many artists are responding to the moment, and many companies are responding to the moment, and that is actually a skill and a habit that I think would be really healthy for us to stay in, no matter how far this goes. I do see that there's the possibilities for what can be called opera are really much larger than what we as an industry tend to think of them as. I think some of the experimental stuff we've seen coming up recently is really amazing. The stuff that Lauren and I are doing together with Film Things is, I think, really interesting and has a future. I think that there's always going to be a world that needs live performance, especially in the analog, like there's no screen, there's just a human and a human, and there's sound between them. I don't think that's going to go away. And I do worry about, my colleagues who at the moment, for whatever reason, are not able to sort of dive into this new way of doing things. I do think there'll be a rearranging of kind of what the business looks like. And that is on the one hand, we should mourn that, like it's sad to be losing what we're losing. And I don't think that conflicts with also like moving forward with what we can do and what we feel is authentic to who we are as artists. And those possibilities are very exciting.
Somebody told me once that in Chinese, the word crises has a synonym or another meaning, or a part of the meaning of the word, how the meaning is structured, is opportunity. And that the implication of that is it by recognizing something as a crisis, the only mitigating value is to turn it into an answer. Yeah. And I love the idea of you saying we're in the new now. I think we're in the new now. That I think the Global Concert Hall with IDAGIO and the IDAGIO Live, but especially the Global Concert Hall, is what I call the third rail. We're producing for analog and digital. And that throws me right into this question. All right, now we're at the heart of the interview. Tell us about your production company. Tell about how this came. First of all, have you always been a film guy? Are you one of those iPhone guy? You're always filming and walking in the park and catching birds, doing wonderful things with one another, or where did this come from?
Yeah, so I'm not really the guy that always has the camera out, or I didn't used to be. I guess I am a little more now, but.
I would say so.
Yeah. My dad was a director of photography when he was alive, and I grew up on film sets. And I didn't really study it officially, but I spent a lot of time around film, and actually had been working on a project which I would love to tell you about, but it's actually going to happen now, and I don't want to pre-announce it. But a project that was important to me that I wrote a screenplay for, and that is a singing piece, but more like a film. Worked on it years ago, and we couldn't really find a place for it to live, because at the time people were like, well, why would we need something like that? Which, fair enough.
Right.
But now, of course, there's a lot of need for that kind of thing. So when I didn't really dream this all up, the way this has gone the last 6 months, I didn't really predict. It's gotten a little bit out of hand, frankly. But when in March, when things shut down, when we'd done our last Giovanni performance that we could do in Washington, D.C. And I was on the phone with some people, Thomas, with Lenny's studio, who, and we were talking out, like, I just wanted to do something. I felt like I immediately understood, and, I don't know if it was just, I was, obsessing about it more than others, but I was looking at a lot of the science and thinking about how things could play out. And I felt very strongly immediately that it was going to be, a year before we were going to get back. And I thought of all my colleagues who, if we get sick, we don't get paid. And that's just, a lot of people, in sort of lay people, don't understand that aspect of our lives. So when everything shuts down and many of these companies said, sorry, we can't pay you anything, I immediately thought, well, we should do something. Like, I'm in a position where I have a little bit of savings. I think I'll be okay for a few months. I was going to be working at Houston Grand Opera next, and they very generously paid 50% of the contracts that were canceled. So I was in an okay position for a small amount of time.
Wow.
Yeah, really, really incredible, actually. So I started with what now seems really obvious, but at the time wasn't, which was like, I called pianist friends of mine. I said, can you play this accompaniment? And I will then listen to it and sing it and record myself, and then I'll edit it together somehow. And so that was kind of the first couple of things. And at the time I was like, oh, wow, we could really do this. Like, we can make some really interesting things this way. And then it kind of, Nick Brownlee, who's this great young bass baritone, I just started talking to all my friends and say, hey, should we try to make something together? And he wanted to do this duet and then sent me this video that was so ridiculous and funny. And I thought, oh, well, I should do a ridiculous and funny one too. And it became sort of a little hit. And like, we just went from there. I did this Rheingold scene with Jamie Barton, which turned out to be really fun.
Yeah.
And it all kind of grew and grew. And then I realized that I was not going to be able to pay bills at some point. And we, my wife and I and our kids, you know, I've been a single income family for 15 years. And so it was like, okay, well, we really got to figure out what to do. And my brother and stepmom in North Carolina had a small film production company. And I thought, well, I'm kind of I'm getting pretty good at editing. I know a little bit about this world. Let's move to North Carolina. We'll start to, and I thought at the time, I was like, maybe I'll do some like real estate videography or something like that to sort of, you know, pull in some money. And then I came up with the thought, well, what if we use this better equipment to start making things that really looked like films, but that were in the opera world? And I made a couple little sort of things that I didn't really release officially, and sent some to some people I knew. Francesca Zambello actually then asked me if I would make something for the Glimmerglass Festival. And that was sort of our first project that it ended up being this Glimmerglass Leader thing, which we just sort of curated a set of Schubert songs and set them all outside and filmed it all outside. About that time is when Lauren
are these things playback? Just to break off of it, technically. So how are you doing these things? Some people are singing in different areas of the world and you're cutting it together, or how do they record it themselves on their iPhone or something and send you the vocal?
Those earlier ones,
or they film themselves?
Like with Jamie, for example, we had Kathleen Kelly played the piano. She recorded herself playing the piano, and she sent it to Jamie and I. Then Jamie listened to the piano in her ear on an earpiece, and at the same time filmed herself on her iPhone. And then she sent that to me. I edited that together with the piano, and then I listened to both of them in my ear while I sang on an iPhone. And in the meantime, sort of came up with all this random stuff to do while I was doing it.
I've done a couple of those. I wasn't sure if it was that fragment. I thought maybe you'd come up with a different way to do it, but that's the only way you really can do it.
Yeah,
it's pretty tedious work.
Yeah, it is. And when we've gotten better and faster at it, which we'll get to when we come to Vinkensport in a minute, but it's, you know, I think in the beginning, a lot of people were like, oh, well, this isn't really collaborating. I miss live, you know, singing with the pianist and all that. And I do, of course, think like the experience of making live music with somebody is much different. But I will say that as we've gotten better at this, there's a whole other way of collaborating. It's like you're just stretching the time period that you're responding to each other, right? So like when Kathy would play and I would say, oh, maybe this is a little more like this, and she would send this version, you know, and then I would respond to her having imagined what I would sing like, you know, and then of course you have possibilities of editing things to be a little slower or faster, and there's a lot of art in the actual editing of something. So it's really just a different genre. I think if you compare it to live, then it's, you know, you may come up short with your expectations. But if you think of it as really an entirely new thing, then there's just some really cool possibilities there.
I'm glad you mentioned Francesca. I was going to say somehow in this conversation, right in the middle of it, is beloved Francesca Zambello, one of the most enlightened, innovative, and brilliant people I've ever met or worked with. Has she been a mentor to you, Lauren?
Oh my gosh, yes. I was fortunate enough to meet Francesca in 2012. When I was not planning on returning to Lyric Opera of Chicago's directing staff. I was getting a lot of directorial work. I was ready to move on. And I noticed that they were planning to produce a new Showboat with Francesca directing. And I think I looked at the rest of the directing staff that season and I said, okay, if you all back off from Showboat, if you let me assist Francesca on Showboat, I will take any other show in the season. And everybody was like, here, great, go. So I wheeled and dealed because I wanted to be in the room with her. You know, there's nobody else, at least at the American level, who is female and running two companies with the directorial career that she has. And I just wanted the chance to understand a little bit in a short amount of time what the entity of Francesca Zambello was and maybe how she got there. And it really was another, much like my introduction to opera, it was another right place, right time meeting. We hit it off, and Houston Grand Opera had actually engaged me the following season to work on a different production, and called and said, you know, opposite of your show is supposed to be Showboat. Would you have any interest in coming and doing that here with us? And I said, oh my gosh, yes. And it really snowballed quite quickly. And I was sort of laughing privately with my family very early on when I met her. And I said, you know, we could be oil and water. This could go nowhere. Or, ha, 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 we could get along and I could be working, you know, and directing at both of her companies. Like that'll ever happen. And, you know, now here we are in 2020, and I've now directed multiple times for both Washington National Opera and Glimmerglass Festival, and continued to work with and be a part of Francesca's team. So she's been hugely influential on me as an artist, as a director. She's a champion of mine. She engages me in work, and she's really pushed me also to do this new administrative work as well. So she's just been an enormous and wonderful impact on my life.
One of the things she's had to keep under wraps in Washington is that she speaks fluent Russian.
Oh, she's incredible. Totally incredible.
Can you imagine that woman speaks Russian at the theater with all those kids? No, it can't be true. You know, one of my favorite moments was I was doing Guillaume Tell with her in Paris. And there was a particularly, the chorus in Paris can be quite unruly, and it was an early rehearsal and they just couldn't be bothered. And most of the chorus, the men's part of the chorus, was made up of Russian immigrants into Paris. They all spoke French, of course, but they were standing there sort of milling about, bitching about this woman in Russian. Mm-hmm. And this went on for a while. I could hear that it was in Russian, but I don't speak Russian, you know? And so at one point she kept saying, please, everybody, please, everybody, please. And you know Francesca. At some point it was like, all right, it's time to take this bull by. She wheels on her heel, looks at all these gentlemen in the chorus, and flawless Russian pretty much dresses them down to their underwear and back. And, you know, among other things, tells them to keep their mouths shut, and they should be very careful what they say about people when they think that they can't be understood. The blood ran out of their faces.
Many jaws dropped.
I had to go back. I said, what did you say to her? She says, well, for one thing, I spoke Russian. They didn't think I was part of it. You can't imagine what they were saying behind my back. I'm not even going to repeat it. You know, I love this moment. She's amazing. When did you work with her first time, Ryan?
Actually, my first time working with her was the Flying Dutchman at the Glimmerglass Festival.
All right.
Really great production. It was, you know, she's actually been such a kind of mentor to me too, and has really taken chances on me over the years. And that was kind of the first one. We didn't know each other that well. And, you know, I was a young singer, and Dutchman was a stretch for me at the time. And it really turned out amazing, and really kind of threw me, you know, forward in time into singing Wagner and other places. And it's funny to hear you talk about the story of you working with her and meeting her, Lauren, because I think about, like, she's kind of the connective tissue between us, right? Like,
she is.
You know, is the reason that you were at Washington National Opera and the reason I was there. And then also she, you know, letting me do this Glimmerglass leader thing kind of opened the door to these other film things, which is why, you know, you ended up calling me about Vinkensport. So yeah, it's been omnipresent.
The leader, because I want to move out of I want to move from the production kind of thing we were talking about. The leader thing was a live filming event, right?
So it was not live streamed, but I was singing on camera.
No, but you were filming people. You were filming people while they were singing.
Yeah. So, and that was me. So it was actually my wife filming me. Vinkensport, which is the project that Lauren and I just did together. That was, we filmed every singer separately and then edited them together.
Is this like the Decameron project?
I don't know. I don't know what the Decameron project is.
Oh, we have to get you up on I'll send you a link to it. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. I talk about piecing it from all over the place, but I'm just going back to the piecing it back together. And I want to get to Vinkensport, but I think what I'm getting at is it's unusual to have a colleague be on stage with you and then turn around and be behind a camera or be the producer.
Yeah.
And when I read the credits on your bio and the projects you're now in, I can't quite tell whether you're hosting something, singing it, or filming it, and very likely all three
Probably
at the
doing
same
all of
time.
it.
Which,
Usually the answer is yes.
which is, yeah, exactly.
That's been a really interesting experience because in a lot of
So
these
either you're
cases-
becoming very lonely or very loved, or you think you're very loved, but actually you're very lonely because everybody loves you because they want a job, but everybody's a little bit kind of because.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about
How's
it
it
that
working
way.
out for you, Ryan?
Now I'm really going to
Yeah.
be worried about that. I appreciate it.
Now some therapy, Ryan. Now some therapy.
But what's interesting is that I think, and this has been true in almost all the projects that I've worked on, there is a kind of divide. Like most film people don't really spend a lot of time around opera, and particularly don't know much about opera singing. And most opera singers don't spend a lot of time on camera and don't know a lot about that process. So I end up being this sort of, they call me here in Atlanta the Sherpa, because I go back and forth between the film people, singing people, and sort of am able to help meld those two worlds. So that's been, I think,
fantastic.
singers appreciate me, either directing or just being there to be able to say, like, the good example is just a little thing like, we talk to all the singers about, if you need to look at the conductor and you have a camera this close to you and the conductor's over there and you do this, it's very, very obvious. So if you're going to look at the conductor, make that conductor a character, and you really like say something to them, and then the difference in that action on camera is the universe. And so that's just a little, it's easy to execute once you know it, but a lot of, so singers appreciate that I sort of understand you need to look at that conductor in that moment. Let's help make that happen,
Two questions. Do you see, well, the first question is, you are, and when you say directing, you mean videography, you mean the video direction, the actual filming of it, versus the direction that Lauren Meeker would be doing? Or are you actually physically saying, go here, go there? Are you doing both?
That's an interesting topic that comes up a lot, and I'll let Loren jump in on this too. But we actually, for Vinkensport, we really were co-directors in the most, No,
I got that, but I'm just sorry to interrupt. Well, I get that. What I'm thinking, when I'm seeing things, I'm seeing, you're filming this opera or directing this opera, directing the filming of this opera. Those are to me 2 or 3 different things. When I see your credit for that, you're filming the opera of whatever in Houston or something, I forget all the lists that you have on there. You're responsible for the filming of it versus someone's production. Is that true? Is that right?
We're actually, this is the big change, because we're essentially making film from scratch that have nothing to do with the stage production. And they're not on the stage.
Fantastic.
They're, all of the different, Bon Appetit that is going to come out with Jamie Barton that we filmed in July. We filmed in my kitchen.
I love it.
Monuments of Hope that we did for Washington National Opera with Janae Bridges, we filmed on location at Monuments in DC. Vinkensport, we filmed at a house that we rented outside in the backyard. Glimmerglass Leader, we filmed in the mountains of upstate New York. So all of these things, I and the team that I'm working with, which is usually my wife, Tanya, and recently also Loren, are coming up with the whole thing at the same time. So to me, that's what's interesting about this, is it's really more in the direction of like independent filmmaking than it is opera production.
Right.
Okay, this is the second part of my question. Do you see this? I mean, obviously it's become, well, you said you moved house and you started this up, so clearly you've been able to pay the bills. Do you see this as a hybrid part of your career? Do you see this as another lane of your career? I mean, so people can still call up and say, I want you to come sing, 7 performances of Fliegende Holland or someplace. They can still do that. And you'll say, should I bring my camera? And they'll say, no, we just want you,
Yeah, I mean,
but that's the one side of the question. The other question is, are people calling up and say, I think how you film is what we need to do to make films now on our opera. Would you come be the film director for our production of XYZ? Is that also coming up on your platform?
Yeah, so both of those things. The first part of your question, it's an ongoing discussion with me and my family and my team. I love this stuff. It's really stretches me creatively in a way that I don't get stretched as a singer. I'm definitely not giving up singing. I have lots of interesting things coming up in the next few years, COVID allowing. I think, often with singers, and Tom, I know have dealt with this too, there's a sort of tendency to, for some reason, it seems specific to singers to say, you are a singer and that is what you do, and stay there and do that.
Right. Stay in your lane.
Yeah, and that's been true, like repertoire wise, right? People will say, oh, well, you're not supposed to sing this or that. You're this kind of baritone. And I have had a tendency, which has gotten me in trouble in the past, of just kind of saying, thank you for your advice. I'm going to do what I want. And so in this case, I think that having both of these things exist in my career would be wonderful. I don't know the future. I don't know if that will continue to be an opportunity for me, but right now it is for both of those things. And I'm very grateful for that. The second part of your question is, yes, that's in fact what I'm doing at the Atlanta Opera right now, because they do have live performances happening. And I'm sort of heading up the film version of that as a director, even though Tomer Zvulun is the stage director. But I do think that there is, like, that's an interesting thing. And I think that there can be more sort of hybrids of that. But there's also this whole genre we kind of just came up with, and I hope we don't pass over it too quickly, which is this like real film opera thing, which there have been a few things, especially, in the 80s, there was all of those, like, Domingo and Traviata kind of things, which I think are the sort of precursors to what we're doing. There's a lot of differences in what we're doing now. But
the Zeffirelli on site stuff.
Yeah.
Very exciting stuff.
I think it's in the direction of that, although it's always been done as this kind of big, spectacular type of production. And I'm really interested, and maybe it's just sort of my film aesthetic, but I really think this sort of indie film style of like available light and like outside and in situation and handheld and, kind of more gritty form, I think is a really interesting direction to go with a lot of operas.
Yeah.
Lauren, the Monuments of Hope is a beautiful project. I saw the credits, and I've dropped the needle through it. I adore Janai Bridges. I've known her since she was also in the Young Artist Program in Chicago. Wonderful singer. I know you work with Julia Bullock a lot. Wonderful singer. Jamie Barton. I mean, these are just, you guys. It's your generation. Go do it. It's fantastic. You're wonderful. I mean, it's very exciting. To see this, and I think you are truly onto something. I think it's big. It surprised me you don't know about Decameron. Lenny Studio needs to get you up to date on Decameron. It's an amazing project, and this whole hybrid world you're talking about is, I think, very exciting. What does it mean to your world, Loren? What does it make? Is it a broader horizon? Is it a different genre to you? What does a stage director feel about it?
Yeah, I think, listen, some stage directors in opera might be drawn to the film world. Others might not. There might be film directors who suddenly go, oh, what is this? And, decide to join in on the new world that we're creating. But I think, Ryan has to change his battery. But I think, I think this is part of, where companies can head in the future. And so one of the reasons I was really interested in collaborating with Ryan was not only because I saw his career headed in the direction of more and larger film projects, even from the onset of COVID. But I also thought that looks really exciting. And I think there are pieces that exist that lend themselves to the vocabulary that Ryan's talking about. And I want to explore that. So what was really exciting about Vinkensport was I knew the piece. I had directed a stage version of it before. My brain immediately thought this could be produced in COVID, but I think we can take it a step farther. It's not just a piece that can be done on stage in COVID. It could actually really be a movie. And that allowed me to then call Ryan and pick up the ball really pretty quickly on creating what this new film world could be. And so I'd like to think that we've learned a lot from each other. I've had the opera director hat on for many, many years, and there's some parts of the conversation for which that's really advantageous. And then Ryan has the actor, singer, and film side. So that the union of that, I think, is making this new form move forward in a really exciting direction.
I should jump in just to say that.
Please. Oh, you're back.
The other,
go ahead.
the team is my wife, Tanya, that she actually was a producer on Vinkensport. And so the three of us together kind of came up with a lot of the stuff for that. And she was a co-director with me for both Monuments of Hope and for Glimmerglass Leader. So she's kind of the...
is she a singer?
She's not, but she was an actress when we met. So she kind of...
she's almost normal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
No. Yeah, but she's a non-musician, which is actually helpful most of the time. But anyway, I said the shout.
And I love working
that-
collaboratively, and I love, like Ryan was talking about earlier, I love sort of breaking down the barriers between role assignments and titles. And so to be able to hop on board with Ryan and Tanya, who also tend to talk in those similar terms and are really interested in collaboration, makes this union quite extraordinary.
Vinkensport, the book is by Royce Vavrick, right?
Correct. Yes.
Did you guys work with him, or did he work with you on this to make your stuff?
We did. So the way it sort of came together was...
And David Little, right?
David Little is the composer.
Right.
So I
exciting.
had my COVID dream. I call it my COVID dream, where I envisioned Vinkensport as a film. The very first person I called was Ryan to say, hey, would you be interested in this? And fortunately, he said yes. And then within a couple of conversations early on, we thought it would be really advantageous to get David and Royce on board. And so the five of us actually did Ryan, a month or two worth of meetings to develop it and talk about it before we even put a pitch together to send to companies. And so they were really, I mean, yes, they birthed the piece, but they were also really crucial to the birth of the film version.
Very cool. Now, Royce is an incredible guy. We had a great time also at Glimmerglass with the Song of America project, but he's also got a couple of operas in the pipeline. He's a kind of amazing guy. So tell me about Monuments and Hope, and tell me, Francesca, this was a commission by the Washington Opera, and the idea behind these filmings and these songs is what? I mean, people really need to see this, ladies and gentlemen. I could show you a bit of it. It's on YouTube. It is not on IDAGIO.com. If you go to Ryan McKinney, in fact, I always show everybody, just really briefly, we're going to go do a screen share here very, very quickly, just so you make sure that you're spelling his name right. Where are we here? No, here we go. All right, so we're about to go actually to Monuments of Hope, right? That's what this is, and you can see his name is Ryan McKinney, right?
Yes.
And it took me, by the way, if you're looking for Miss Lauren Meeker, you're going to have to remember that it's Lauren Meeker.
You do.
Fortunately, if you write E without the period and then Loren, and by the way, it's Loren, not Aluren. Thank you very much. But so I'm giving you a lot of heads up to get to these wonderful people, their websites. But the Monuments of Hope is this project we've been talking about, and this is on Ryan's thing. If I can also find it other places, but what I also very often do, where do I have this here? If I can pull it over here, here's the IDAGIO. So if you go to Ryan McKinney on IDAGIO and you look here, you'll see my good friend Michael, and you can click on this and you'll see this is now what I love to show you how to do. For instance, the IDAGIO platform is on your computer, it's on a website, it's on an app on your computer, it's on Android and iOS, whatever, and it's all completely real time. It's over 20,000 classical composers. Did you know, Ryan, that there are 20,000 classical music composers? I did not know that. This is a huge database. It was the first one out there for streaming. It's an unbelievable and fun place to hunt for things. If you go over here to the ellipse, you can make a playlist. If you go over to the chevron over here, you get a bit more information. So if I was going to play Isabel Leonard, that'd be fine. But what I could do is go over here and say, I'm going to make a playlist, and I'll just add it to this SSB playlist that I made the other day. So if I go to my telephone right now, I mean instantly, and clicked on my playlist on IDAGIO, and I went to SSB, it will all be there. You see, there's Michael Tisson Thomas. So making a playlist is one of the most fun things you can do in just on the streaming platform of IDAGIO. The most interesting development, and where certainly the future is moving for, especially in COVID, but even post-COVID, is the Global Concert Hall, where literally we're doing in the concert world a lot of what you're trying to do in the film and scenic world. So that's my little splay for idagio.com, which I think is an amazing and wonderful platform. Talk to me about Monuments of Hope. It was a commission. Was it, whose idea was it? Who chose the visuals? Who chose the songs? How did you film it? Give us the whole back end of the whole wonderful thing. It's a beautiful, beautiful project.
Thank you. So I around sort of April, May, June, started calling all of my friends who are colleagues I really want to work with, and just said, basically, what should we do? And Janae Bridges and I wanted to do something together. And we had sort of talked about several different projects that sort of tried to address political issues and racism and things like that. And they kind of hadn't gotten off the ground. At the same time, I was talking to Francesca Zambello about potential ideas for something we could do in the fall. And so I came up with this idea to do a set of songs in front of and around monuments in DC, because also Washington National Opera had this monuments project coming up, and that we would try to be hopeful about our future while not washing away our past. And so Janae and I came up with a rough part together. We wanted to highlight an array of composers, of different backgrounds, and frankly, a lot of Black composers in particular are not given the voice they should in our world. And we also, another idea that I had, which I really is the thing I think is the coolest about it, is that, I had this idea about Janae is so much like the sort of linear artistic ancestor of somebody like Marian Anderson, right? And so I was thinking of the iconic Marian Anderson moment on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and thought it would be interesting to sort of update that. Like, where have we gone from then to now, and where could we still go? And so we together commissioned Sean Okpebolo, this wonderful composer, to write a new version of My Country 'Tis of Thee, with a new poem by Marcus Amaker, who is the poet laureate of Charleston, South Carolina, both Black men. And we wanted to sort of let them have a go at, like, what would you want to say with this if you could rewrite this moment, this idea. And so that ends the piece. And it's actually a duet between Janae and I, and it sort of gets at this dialogue that, we're all trying to have right now. I mean, as we speak, we don't know who the next president of the United States will be, and there's a lot of unrest.
Yes, we do.
Well, yeah, I mean,
yes, we do.
Who knows? I haven't checked my phone lately, so. But I think that I think that there is a world in which, and if we had another hour, I'd talk to you about this amazing group I work with, Search for Common Ground, who's sort of involved with me in these types of things too. I think that there's a world in which you can have incredibly strong opinions about the way you think things should go and the way things have gone, and still engage with people that disagree with you in a way that is kind and loving. And I think that's very difficult right now. And I think that often people will hear me say something like that and say, well, that's, I don't owe them anything. I don't need to be nice to them. They, are racist or whatever. And I think that's true. But to me, the way forward in those situations is to grapple with the topics in a way that includes the people who are doing the bad stuff. And that's, comes a lot from me as an artist, having played a lot of characters who are objectively bad people, but who are still people. So to me, that's kind of like what Monuments was about, was like, how do we talk about this in a way that isn't only, America is racist and bad, but like also doesn't say America is not racist and bad, but that like tries to deal with it. And I think that our art has a really, as musicians and as singers, we have a really unique way of getting into that isn't about intellectual argument over who's right and who's wrong, but about empathy and emotional connection.
Well, I mean, beautifully said, Ryan. I mean, beautifully put. All I can say is, one, we're cut from the same cloth, but two, exactly what you said as an older colleague down the road. This is what has hurt the most about this. And it's not about being Republican or Democrat, or I don't really care about the parties. It's this essential polemic hatred. And this is not what America, this is not the America I was raised in. This is not who my father raised. This is not how I got along with people who I vehemently disagreed with. This is not how we move the ball forward. This isn't the politics. Everybody venerates Reagan as if he was some sort of half god back in the day. And that's not even the point. But he knew how to compromise. He knew how to get along with people, and people know how to get along with him. Right along with your point, the other side of your point and how you're looking at it, the people that you disagree with, I think of it also as finding ways to have on-ramps for people who you know are going to disagree with you. And say, okay, but what I'm after is the same hereafter. It's a quality of life. It's the ability to be free. But you're right. We're stuck in a kind of hateful polemic today that is new. This level, being close to having close elections, having contentious elections, having rabid arguments, being of incredibly opposed opinions, and all that sort of thing is not new in our country. That's what our democracy has been. It's messy, it's loud, it's volatile, it's very fast, and we'll get through this. But what is new in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years if I'm generous, but is that it's all come into camps and tribes and immovable positions. And what you're saying about the arts having a demonstrative role in how to, one, mitigate arguments, but also enlighten people to other empathies and other comprehensions of what is. I mean, isn't that the essence of liberal arts education? I mean, do you guys? I mean, I'm older than you guys, but do you feel it as well? What happened to our liberal arts education and our desire for curiosity and culture in our own country? The reason exactly what you're saying about what you did is why I love the Song of America project. If you know your own songs, you might actually understand that everybody's just human. Whether you put on your pants this way or you're dressed that way, that's a prism. But you're a human being first. Love has no gender. So what's all this bullshit,
Really important to keep going back and forth on that argument and saying, what I'm saying is not that we should not call out racism when we see it, or that we should fight for universal health care if that's something that we think is really important. I think that you do not have to compromise your views or your truth to engage with people that you disagree with, and in a way that is
well put.
Yeah.
Right.
Lauren, are you as adamant about all this as well? Are you involved in educational endeavors along the lines?
Yeah, I mean, I have a family that, in addition to in theater, we have a lot of educators in my family as well. So I've grown up around educators and teaching everything myself, from dance to theater to gymnastics, and now, obviously doing a lot of work and coaching with young artists, and also working with universities. So I love the educational efforts that I'm able to provide in my own way, and I get very sad when I look at the decimation of arts education, but just the disintegration of education, period, in America. And I think we have a long way to go to unify, to educate, and to strengthen our country as we go forward. And I am here to help in any way I can to create a better future for us.
Well, I mean, I said in the last couple of days, post election, we're going to have one road is going to be recapturing the proper narrative that we've been talking about tonight. The other road is a kind of underground and resistance that is not violent, but nevertheless persistent, along Leonard Bernstein's quote of, what do we do if they prohibit it? Well, we play it more, we play it louder. I would like to believe that we just get to reform the narrative. We get to widen the repertoire. And as soon as people can trust to sit next to other people in a building again, maybe we'll have a even more enlivened engagement. Ryan, have you had some singing to do in the last 6 months? I would ask, I had a couple of recitals, only a couple. I lost 90% of my calendar as well, like everybody else. But I did do a recital in Zurich on July 7, Mahler's birthday. And it was like we were all a bunch of drug addicts. I mean, it was live music, and we were mainstreaming all this emotion in a musical language. And it was Mahler in the second half. It was all American music, and as you say, also predominantly American, African American composers and poets. I wanted to give people the chance to realize that America has much deeper rivers of thought and emotion than very often gets blasted in the mainstream press or people think. And you're absolutely right, by the way. The glorious unknown canon of classical music is the creativity of African Americans in our country. And right next to it is the creativity of women in our country. And the rest of my career is going to be all about that. You know, it's an amazing world. But have you had that experience in the COVID of a live performance? You could just feel that everybody that was there plus you were just tapping into something you knew was your lifeblood?
I have sung a lot on camera. I have not been in a live performance with an audience as a singer. I was witness to have been several times now witness to performances here in Atlanta of Pagliacci and Kaiser. And I have to say, the first on the opening night, when at the end people started applauding and stood up, I just had this like wave of emotion, because I didn't realize how often I heard that in my life. Just the sound of a few hundred people clapping is so specific to what we do. And I was just really overwhelmed by it. And it, I think, showed that they were so grateful. You know, you could just feel this, like they hadn't seen a live performance in many, many months. And
all right.
And yeah, it's I don't think anyone's ever going to replace that. I really don't.
And if I may, as a closing thought, so that people, even though we're in a digital dimension here, your ambition is not to replace that live experience with digital or filmed experience, is it? I mean, it's an augmentation. It's an expansion of it.
Yeah, it's in tandem with. Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's not a zero-sum game. We're not. There is room to expand our audience and to expand our art form and keep all of the things that we love about opera. You know, I don't think that there's a limit to what we can do. And it's not, I think, making an opera movie does not have to take away from a live opera, just in the way that making a movie for Netflix doesn't take away from a live production of a Shakespeare play. So I think that the future is the possibilities are open.
It's opening
the filming
the possibilities, not replacing. Yeah.
Exactly. I was going to say the filming of Richard III with Al Pacino didn't stop any of the theater productions, did it? You know?
Correct.
Right. Oh,
they need each other, actually. You know, the more ways that we innovate, the more ways we capture audiences, the more they can unify and build on each other, the better, but not to replace.
That's a wonderful closing word. It's been a wonderful conversation. We didn't have much music tonight, but we don't have much. It's not a radio show. Thank you very much for sharing. I'm sure that I know that our public, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the thoughts of what's happening now, and certainly the face of what our art form is and the possibilities for it, and our concern for audience and repertoire and substance and music and you. All along the way and to the end of it all. It's a living art form, because it's us and you and it at the same time, in whatever fashion it is. So thank you for joining us. We've gone a little bit over time, but not really. We can go as long as we want. This is IDAGIO Live. It's Thursday with Thomas. It's been Lauren Meeker. We call her Loren.
Yeah.
And Ryan McKinney. You guys are great. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Hang on, we're going to close off here and we'll talk behind the scenes. Thank you, everybody. Good